They burned $12 million right in front of her face. No hesitation, no guilt, just cold eyes and cruel silence as the check curled into flames inside the family's antique fireplace. Lucy's mother even smiled, as if setting that paper ablaze somehow erased Lucy from the family's legacy. But Lucy didn't scream. She didn't cry. She smiled, because what they destroyed wasn't the real inheritance. And what she held in her heart and hidden behind a canvas in her childhood bedroom was something worth far more than they could ever understand. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of their unraveling. If that first spark pulled you in, stay with me. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. What would you do if your parents burned $12 million in front of you? Lucy had always felt like a ghost in her own family, seen but not acknowledged, spoken to only when necessary, and often dismissed as the emotional one. While her parents flaunted wealth and status in suburban Connecticut society, Lucy buried herself in painting, her one true refuge. Her grandfather, Harold Whitmore, was the only person who truly saw her. A former art dealer turned reclusive philanthropist, he encouraged Lucy's artistic passion from an early age. Every weekend visit to his ivy-covered estate was filled with laughter, old records, and the smell of turpentine and Turkish coffee. Then suddenly, Harold passed. No warm goodbyes, just a sterile funeral and a looming will reading at the family estate. That day, Lucy walked into the old Whitmore house, not expecting much, certainly not to be named sole heir to $12 million. But as the lawyer read the line that changed everything, her parents' faces hardened. And in one swift motion, her father took the check, and her mother struck the match. As the flames crackled, Lucy felt the past rise within her like a tide. This wasn't just about money, it was about truth, hidden, painted, and waiting to be found. Shall I continue? The fireplace crackled, eating away at the edges of the $1 million check, but Lucy barely heard it anymore. All she could hear was the voice of her mother, cold and clipped from years ago. Real artists don't hide in attics. They starve or succeed. You do neither. She was 16 the first time her parents left her behind for a family vacation. They said she was too fragile to handle the trip to Paris. In truth, they didn't want her in the photographs. Her brother Connor, with his prep school blazer and jawline sharp as ambition, was always the star. Lucy. She was the blurry figure in the background if she made it into the frame at all. Their estate in Connecticut, all stone and silence, had never felt like home. It was her grandfather's cottage, nestled on the edge of the estate grounds where she'd felt alive. It was there she painted barefoot in the garden, where he whispered stories of lost art and secret legacies, as though they were fairy tales meant only for her. But even in that sanctuary, the world found ways to remind her she didn't belong. One afternoon, she overheard her father's voice like steel telling Harold, "Stop filling her head with dreams. She'll never make a living off colors." She remembered how Harold's face had tightened, his fingers curling protectively around his coffee mug. But he never confronted them. Instead, he poured his love into Lucy, gifting her a new brush set on every birthday, letting her sleep beside half-finished canvases, and one autumn evening handing her a painting he'd never let anyone else see. This, he said, pointing to a sea of crimson and gold, isn't just a painting. It's a message. And one day it will find you when you need it most. At the time, she didn't understand. But she'd hung it in her bedroom, where it watched over her through college rejections, failed gallery submissions, and the 1,000 quiet deaths of a young woman trying to prove herself without approval. When Harold passed, Lucy grieved alone. Her parents arranged the funeral with military efficiency. No art, no emotion, just clean suits and tighter smiles. At the wake, her mother actually said, "At least now you'll have to grow up." Lucy didn't argue. She just walked to the edge of the estate, stood in Harold's empty studio, and wept beside his easel. The world had dimmed. Still, she persisted. She painted through the nights, worked temp jobs to afford paints and canvases, and built a small, loyal following online. Her art spoke of isolation, of watching the world from the window. People saw themselves in her work, but her family never did. Then came the letter from the lawyer. The will reading would be held at the main house. Lucy hesitated. Returning there felt like stepping into an open wound, but something tugged at her, a whisper that maybe Harold hadn't left her completely. She walked into that grand parlor with its towering chandelier and velvet drapes like a woman entering enemy territory. Her parents greeted her with a stiff nod. Connor didn't even look up from his phone. When the lawyer began, the tension thickened with every line. Lucy kept her head down until she heard her name. To my granddaughter, Lucy Ann Whitmore, I leave the sum of $12 million equal. For reasons she will understand in time. There was silence, then chaos. Her mother gasped. Her father leaned forward and Connor finally looked up. Before she could speak, the check was in her father's hands. "This is a joke," he spat. "No," the lawyer said, unshaken. "It's Harold's final wish." "Not anymore," her mother snapped, striding to the fireplace. Lucy stood frozen, the room spinning. But when the flames rose, something inside her settled. She knew. This was only the surface. Harold wouldn't have left her unprotected. There was something else hidden, layered, encrypted in memory and brushstroke. That night, while the others stormed and fumed, Lucy returned to the old cottage. Dust covered everything, but on the far wall hung the painting he'd given her years ago, untouched, and waiting. Under the dim light of her phone, she ran her fingers over the canvas and felt it an uneven texture behind one section. A faint seam. A hidden compartment. Efficient, her breath caught. "Would you like me to continue?" The hidden compartment revealed itself slowly, like a secret begging to be uncovered. Lucy pressed her fingernail against the edge of the canvas, levering it open with trembling hands. Inside was a small, dust-covered box, heavy, ornate, and locked with a delicate clasp. Her heart pounded. This box was more than just a container. It was the key to everything her family tried to erase. She carefully pried it open, revealing a trove of documents, letters, and photographs, a secret legacy that Harold had guarded with his life. Among them was a handwritten letter addressed to Lucy, penned in her grandfather's shaky but deliberate script. "My dear Lucy, if you're reading this, then the surface has been torn away. Know that what you inherit is not only wealth, but truth, a truth buried beneath lies and greed. Your parents have always resented you for the light you carry, a light they could never extinguish. But remember, the greatest art is born from ashes. Use this wisely." Tears blurred Lucy's vision as she sifted through the papers. There was more than money hidden here. Among the letters were detailed maps to undisclosed properties, secret art collections, and shockingly evidence of her parents' efforts to manipulate Harold's estate behind his back. The most biting revelation was a series of emails and financial records, exposing how her parents had siphoned money from Harold's accounts for years, disguised as family expenses. Every accusation Lucy had felt deep inside, every pang of suspicion, was now confirmed. Her hands shook not from fear, but from the surge of power awakening inside her. For the first time, Lucy realized she held the truth that could bring her parents' empire crashing down. Lucy didn't waste time. Over the next few weeks, she connected with old allies of her grandfather, trusted lawyers, art dealers, and historians who helped her authenticate the hidden assets. She showcased the paintings in underground galleries, turning the mysterious Whitmore collection into an instant sensation. Critics praised the raw emotion and bold strokes that mirrored Lucy's own journey through pain and defiance. But the real shock came when she confronted her parents. One evening, under the same chandelier where they'd burned the check, Lucy stood, tall, a thick folder of evidence in hand. "You destroyed a check," she said, voice steady, "but I hold the proof of your deception. You took from Grandpa for years, but I won't be silent." Her mother's face twisted with fury. "You think you can shame us?" her father snarled. "You'll never claim what's ours." Lucy smiled, not with weakness, but with the fierce certainty of someone who had survived betrayal and risen stronger. "This isn't about money anymore. It's about justice, and I'm just getting started." But fate had another twist waiting. As the media caught wind of the scandal, Connor, the brother who had once ignored her, publicly sided with their parents. In an unexpected press conference, he accused Lucy of fabricating the evidence, calling her a desperate artist craving attention. The blow hit hard. Yet amid the chaos, a surprising ally appeared: Harold's old business partner, Margaret, who held a handwritten codicil to the will, a document that explicitly named Lucy as the sole executor of the estate, with full power to reclaim stolen assets. Margaret's testimony dismantled the family's public defense and turned the tide. The climax wasn't just about money or art. It was a battle for identity, respect, and the truth buried beneath decades of lies. Lucy's rise wasn't just financial, it was deeply personal. The girl, once dismissed as fragile, had grown into a woman of unshakable resolve, exposing her family's darkest secrets while embracing the legacy of love her grandfather left behind. Ready to continue? The letter went viral within hours. Lucy had only meant to share a tribute, a heartfelt post honoring her grandfather's legacy and quietly announcing her stewardship of his hidden art collection. She included a passage from Harold's letter and a photo of the secret painting that had led her to the truth. But social media exploded. Headlines followed: granddaughter of late art tycoon uncovers secret inheritance family, accused of embezzling from reclusive collector's estate, and then came the smear campaign. Her brother Connor, polished in a tailored suit and armed with rehearsed charm, appeared on a morning show. "It's sad, really," he said. "Lucy was always the outsider, the fragile artist. We tried to support her. But this is nothing but delusion fueled by grief. My father burned that check because he knew it was fake." Lucy watched the clip from a friend's loft in Brooklyn, heart pounding in her chest like a war drum. Her phone lit up with hateful messages. "Gold digger, liar, you're sick. You let your grandpa rot so you could take his money." She had expected resistance. She hadn't expected the world to side with them. The walls began to close in. Within a week, 2 galleries that had agreed to feature Lucy's paintings suddenly backed out. Sponsors dropped. Interviews were canceled. Her inbox was flooded with polite rejections and not-so-polite threats. The art world, fickle elitist obsessed with scandal, had turned its back. Even her closest supporters grew distant. One by one, they started asking questions with unfamiliar tones. "Are you sure this wasn't just a misunderstanding? Maybe don't push the family stuff so hard. You don't want to be known only for the drama, do you?" The loneliness was crushing. But the final blow came in the form of a letter, not from the media, not from strangers, but from her parents' lawyer. It was a cease and desist. They were suing her for defamation. Her own mother's signature sat cold and sharp at the bottom of the page. Lucy dropped the envelope on her kitchen table and sat there, frozen, staring through the window at the colorless sky. Everything Harold had given her, the art, the letters, the evidence, was real. But the world didn't want real. It wanted clean, curated stories where the powerful remained untouchable and the quiet girl stayed quiet. Her fingers curled into fists. Was this the price of truth? Was this all her voice was worth? Silence, exile, and humiliation. For 3 days, Lucy didn't leave her apartment. She ignored the calls, shut down her socials, even unplugged her landline. She barely ate. Her studio remained untouched canvases waiting like unspoken thoughts. The fire inside her had dimmed to ash, but on the 4th morning she woke before dawn, sweat on her brow, and her grandfather's voice echoing in her mind. "The greatest art is born from ashes." She stumbled into the studio. And she painted, not for galleries, not for collectors, for herself, for the girl who stood in the corner of family portraits, for the child who was told she wasn't enough, for the woman who watched her inheritance burn and didn't flinch. Colors exploded across canvas: raw reds, deep blacks, white slashes like screams. Her grief, her fury, her truth. She painted until her knees ached and her fingers cramped until the sun set and rose again. For the first time, the pain wasn't just a wound, it was a brushstroke. When she emerged, she wasn't the same Lucy. She wore no makeup, her hair tied back, and her voice firm. She called Margaret Harold's old business partner and arranged a meeting with a private legal team, one that specialized in estate recovery and defamation countersuits. She drafted her own public letter, not for sympathy, but for clarity. She included copies of the codicil financial documents and photographs of the hidden archive. Every claim backed with proof. Then she released her new body of work, a collection called Inheritance Portraits of Survival. She didn't approach galleries this time. She rented a modest warehouse space and opened it to the public. People came, slowly at first, then in waves. They didn't come for the name Whitmore. They came for her. Each canvas told a story: the pain of betrayal, the fire of rebirth, the silence between words that should have been love. It wasn't just an art show. It was a reckoning. And then the moment she never expected. One afternoon, as she stood quietly in a corner of the exhibition, her mother walked in. Alone. She looked smaller somehow. Her signature pearls replaced with a plain coat, her perfect posture slightly wilted. They stood in silence for nearly a minute. Finally, her mother said, "You remind me of him." Lucy didn't respond. "I didn't know he'd hidden all that," she added. "We thought we were protecting you." Lucy met her eyes not with anger, but with something colder. "No, you were protecting yourselves. You burned a part of me and smiled while it turned to ash. That kind of protection comes with a cost." Her mother said nothing, just nodded and left. Lucy didn't watch her go. She had crossed a threshold. The child in her might have longed for reconciliation. But the woman she'd become understood that some wounds weren't meant to be bandaged. They were meant to scar so the next generation would remember. "Would you like me to continue?" The exhibit stayed open for exactly 21 days. On the final evening, Lucy arrived an hour before the doors closed. The space was empty. The guests long gone, the floor still warm with echoes of steps, whispers, gasps, and the silent tears of strangers who had seen their own pain reflected in her brushstrokes. She moved slowly from painting to painting. These weren't just artworks. They were chapters. Her silent screams on canvas, her quiet rebellion, her rebirth. In front of the final piece, a massive, haunting portrait of her grandfather, standing behind a younger version of Lucy, his hand resting over her heart, she stopped. For the first time in months, her chest loosened. "You kept your promise," she whispered. And then came a voice behind her, low but steady. "So did you." She turned. Margaret stood in the doorway holding 2 cups of tea, her gray coat dusted with early spring rain. She walked over and handed Lucy a cup without a word, then settled onto the bench nearby. Her presence was calm, grounding, like stone beside fire. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the way people do when words aren't necessary anymore. "He knew they would fight you," Margaret finally said. "That's why he left you puzzles instead of instructions." Lucy let out a quiet breath. "I used to wish he just told me outright. But now, I get it. He wasn't just leaving me a fortune. He was leaving me the tools to rebuild." Margaret nodded. "And now that you've rebuilt, the question is, what will you build next?" It was a question Lucy had already been turning over in her mind. She'd been offered gallery representation book deals, even a documentary proposal. People wanted to hear from Lucy Whitmore, the heiress turned artist, the phoenix from the flames. But she didn't want to be defined by the destruction of others. Not her parents' greed, not her brother's betrayal, not even Harold's wealth. Her story wasn't a reaction anymore. It was a creation. And it needed to begin on her own terms. The next morning, Lucy packed a single suitcase, not of clothes, but of brushes, journals, and her grandfather's letters. She left behind the loft, the press, and the buzzing city that had fed on her drama like wolves on blood. She didn't announce her departure. She didn't owe anyone a final statement. Instead, she boarded a train to a quiet coastal town in Maine, where an old artist residency one Harold had once supported in secret had offered her space, solitude, and silence. The cabin overlooked a rocky shoreline. There was no internet, no constant hum of news or gossip, just gulls and tide and the slow breath of the Atlantic. Each morning, Lucy painted with no intention to sell. Each afternoon, she wrote letters, reflections, even a collection of essays exploring grief, truth, and the strange redemption of inheritance. And each night, she sat on the porch with a warm blanket and a teacup Harold had once used and watched the moon rise. In that silence, she made peace with her past. Not forgiveness that wasn't the goal, but peace. She accepted that her parents may never apologize, that her brother may never believe her, that her name may always stir controversy in certain circles. And that was fine, because her identity no longer depended on their recognition. One day, she received a small envelope forwarded by Margaret. Inside was a letter handwritten, careful, hesitant. Lucy, I don't expect you to read this, but I want to say, I see now. The way we treated you wasn't protection. It was control. I was afraid you'd outgrow us, and you did. I still don't understand you. But I'm trying, Mom. Lucy read it once, then again. She didn't cry. Instead, she folded it neatly and placed it in the back of her sketchbook. Not a wound, not closure, just a page in a very long book. The final turning point came weeks later. Lucy received an offer to teach, not at a fancy university, but at a local community center in a small town near her retreat. They wanted someone to lead a course in art and personal truth, not for professionals, for survivors, for the grieving, for women learning to reclaim their voices. It was the first offer she accepted without hesitation, because this was the legacy Harold wanted for her. Not just to inherit wealth, but to transform it into meaning, to take ashes and make beauty. On her first day in class, she brought no canvas, only a mirror. She placed it at the front of the room and said, "This is your first self-portrait. You won't draw tonight. You'll see. And when you're ready, you'll decide what deserves to be remembered." That night, as she walked home through quiet streets, Lucy realized she had chosen. Not vengeance, not fame, not approval. She had chosen herself. Ready for the final 2 chapters? 3 months after Lucy's final exhibition closed and she left the city, the lawsuit her parents filed quietly collapsed. The codicil, once dismissed as fabricated, had been authenticated by 2 independent legal experts. Margaret, now publicly supporting Lucy, testified about Harold's intentions. And perhaps most damning of all, a private investigator hired discreetly by Lucy's legal team uncovered financial documents that linked her father to the quiet liquidation of several of Harold's rare assets in the weeks before his death. When news broke, the backlash was swift and brutal. Headlines flipped like a tidal wave. Family tried to erase artist heiress, but truth won Whitmore legacy, tarnished by greed. Her parents went silent. Connor once, the media darling, issued a weak apology through a PR firm claiming he was misled and grieving. The public didn't buy it. Sponsors dropped him. Art circles whispered. And the final blow came when the foundation Harold had quietly endowed released a statement. All rights and intentions remain with Ms. Lucy Whitmore, the only heir Harold ever trusted. No court battles, no dramatic press conferences, just truth and consequences. Lucy never gloated, but word traveled. Her small art class grew. Donations began to trickle into her name. And one evening, as she taught a workshop on art as reclamation, a young woman approached her after class. "My mother followed your story. She said it gave her the courage to leave. That was the reward, not the check, not the press. It was the ripple, the change, the echo of truth. Lucy had always believed art could heal. Now she knew it could also correct." Ready for the emotional close. Lucy never returned to the old mansion in Connecticut. She didn't need to. Her inheritance was never really the money, it was the strength to choose herself. To define legacy not by bloodlines, but by boundaries, by truth, by creation. In the Soffit Mornings by the Sea, she painted what she felt, not what was expected. Her work no longer screamed, it whispered. And that was enough, no longer haunted by what was taken. Lucy stood firm in what could never be burned, her worth, her voice, her vision. She wasn't just Harold's granddaughter. She wasn't just the girl whose parents burned $12 million in spite. She was the woman who built something greater from the ashes. And maybe that's the quiet revenge life gives us. When we no longer seek approval, we become untouchable. If this story spoke to something inside you, you're not alone. Comment below. What have you walked away from to protect your peace? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs a reminder you are not what they tried to bury. You are what refused to burn.